Welcome. I'm so grateful you're here today. Welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by the Integrative Wellness Program at IWMF. And as the director of that program, I'm so pleased to introduce our guest today, Kirstin Nussgruber. And she'll be presenting on the topic of sugar and cancer, which is a confusing topic that we get a lot of questions coming from our community, patients and caregivers affected by Waldenstrom. I'm so grateful that she's here to help us sort it out. And just a little backstory, I know Kirstin through having taken one of her webinars and seeing immediately what an amazing presentation, high quality research, current research, and also a personal connection as a cancer survivor herself. And I felt that I just wanted to snag her for our community. And then I found out that we're both in the patient advocacy group for the Society of Integrative Oncology. And so we starting to form all of these different connections, and that's just a wonderful thing. So thank you so much for being here today, Kirstin. I am curious right out of the gate if you could kind of answer my initial question, which is what led to you becoming this, cancer nutrition expert that you have become?
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having me on your education panel here. So, what led me to this? I had the opportunity to live in Munich for a 3-year stint. This was based on my husband's transferal work-wise. The kids were younger, and I was wondering, what can I do while we're living there? I am German speaking, and decided to take my hobby and passion and change my career. And hobby and passion has always been nutrition, health, and wellness, and go to nutrition school in Munich. And while I was there, I got diagnosed with my first breast cancer. So that kind of just cemented it for me, which direction I want to go once I'm done with nutrition school. And then we're returning back to the United States as well, is who do I want to focus on? Because nutrition is a huge area, and supporting people with nutritional choices, again, is a very varied area. So an advice given to us was focus on something that you're really passionate about. And here I am. I'm passionate about cancer nutrition, partly also because of myself and those involved that I know in my family, but also it is just such an area that, we can really help ourselves to a great degree. And that's really why I want to stay in this field. And it's also a field that really fits snugly into this whole integrative oncology concept, and which is ever developing and receiving more attention worldwide as well. And I just want to be part of that.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. I am in agreement with you about, that being a field that is expanding right now, and we're getting more and more connection with healthcare providers and hoping to help people help themselves in all of these different ways. Nutrition has been something that, we're a little late to the party on with our programming, but we're catching up. And so just so you all know, Kirstin is a board certified nutrition consultant. As she mentioned, she's a cancer survivor. She's educated in integrative oncology education, and she's active in a lot of different communities. That integrative oncology group we talked about, as well as the American Association of Integrative Oncology. And so I will share more about her bio in the details of this webinar's recording, and also ways that you can get in touch with her. So I'll just read the disclaimer for all of our wellness offerings, and then we'll be off to the races. These complementary or integrative practices are to be used in conjunction with standard medical treatment along with the approval of your doctor. So thank you so much. If you have questions as we go along, please pop them into the chat. I'll do my best to condense them and present them to Kirstin at the end, and then we'll have some Q&A time as well. Thanks so much, and go for it, Kirstin, whenever you're ready. We're so excited for this topic.
All right. So when Anne reached out to me, we decided, how do we condense this? How do we offer nugget size information, and what do we really want to start off with? The topic of nutrition in cancer care is varied and huge. So we kind of nailed it down to making the assumption that the question on cancer and sugar seems to be top of all the questions generally that are asked. So that's why nailing down on sugar and cancer. And just to frame it for you before I get going and kick it off, what do we really know? It's often used in the media in a very sensationalist way, causing a lot of fear. Sugar feeds cancer, just drop the sugar, etc., etc. So it raises a lot of questions, and I'm going to take you through what we know, what the most recent research is, then also wanting to just clarify in what way does sugar affect anything to do with cancer and its metabolism, and using a case example, just walking you through the steps of really trying to understand what the background is and why we should watch our sugar intake, but making it a little bit more about, the actual ins and outs instead of just sugar feeds the tumor and you can starve cancer by just stopping sugar. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So our goals today is, yes, I want to debunk some common myths. I want to clarify what the latest research is. What do we really know? And how does it influence the body's metabolism in particular? And why does that matter when we're talking about cancer risk, growth, and progression? I've also just looked at what's the strength of evidence, because when we look at research, the research that is available, we also have to take that second step and understand, is this solid research? And the evidence that gets presented, can that really be generalized? Not always. That's not always the case. Then I want to take you through how, in particular, a high intake of a specific type of sugar can contribute to something which is very important for us to know, regardless of the type of cancer that we have, namely chronic inflammation related to also obesity, but not only, and why those are common risk factors. And then take you through the whole strategy with a case study and leaving you with some really concrete examples of what you can do, once we hop off the call, if you're not already doing that. So Sugar 101, what are we actually talking about? So let's just understand the types of sugar. So we have naturally occurring sugars, which are found in fruits and whole food sources such as honey or maple syrup, and of course in some vegetables. And they come packaged with fiber and with all various other nutrients, with antioxidants, with phytonutrients, especially all the very colorful fruits and vegetables. So we have that. We have the so-called added sugars, starting with white table sugar, various types of corn syrups, including fructose syrups. And these are added in the food processing situation. Artificial sweeteners are part of that. They're part of the whole zero sugar drive. Drink this, it's got zero sugar. Those are all added. Some of those will affect our blood sugar glucose and others won't. And we can touch on that as well as we go on. And if you have questions here too, please, shelve that for now, and we can come back to that as well. And then thirdly, of course, in our own body's metabolism, all digestible carbohydrates, no matter what we eat, eventually turn into glucose in the blood. I will go into a little bit more detail on that later. Amino acids, part of proteins, can become glucose in the liver as well. And it's very important to remember that various organs, especially brain and muscles, they need glucose for fuel. So we cannot just shut off sugar or glucose. We actually will always have some glucose in our system. And some of our organs will always need glucose to fuel their energy as well. So I'll start just to give a little perspective on the recent research, sugar and overall cancer risk. What is out there? What's the latest information out there? This particular umbrella review, the first one, dating from 2023, focused on a high intake of free and added sugars. In other words, those sugars that are added in processing. And they basically could compare many studies that were done and said associated with adverse outcomes, meaning weight gain, cardiometabolic disease, and some cancers. So the quality of evidence here was a bit of a low quality, meaning that sometimes the studies were not quite as robust as we want them to be. But nevertheless, the results, the conclusions are still important to take note as they feed into a bigger picture here as well. The other longitudinal studies review that I want to just reference here again takes a couple of studies into account that were done and kind of then throws it in one pot and summarizes that. And the summary here said that, again, elevated intake of added sugars, they did link it to increased cancer risk. They broadened it, general cancer, not just very specific cancers. And they highlighted these metabolic disruptors like insulin resistance, oxidative stress, and inflammation. And we will get back to those three in particular because they're quite important to understand in this whole context of sugar and cancer. So you will hear or might have probably heard the term metabolic health. What does that mean? Metabolism. That means how the body really functions. We're looking at the body from a whole aspect, a functional aspect. How does the metabolism work in the body? And what we can safely say from a research point of view is that the sugar cancer risk primarily operates through this metabolic pathway. Okay, so we have to look at how does sugar affect our metabolism rather than say, if I eat this, this is going to feed my tumor. And if I stop eating that, I will not feed my tumor anymore. And I'm highlighting that because you hear that time and time again in the media. Right now, there's this show going on again about teaching you about the hidden cancer unrevealed, it's called. And again, the sensationalist language is being used. And I will out myself here. I'm not really into that. I think that can be very misleading and it can cause a lot of fear and confusion and misunderstanding. So we need to understand how sugar really affects the entire metabolic process of the body. One final highlight here, because I get this question a lot about sugary drinks. And of course, we know that the sodas are high in sugar. But I've also put the picture in here of orange juice as well, because orange juice like that is also incredibly high in sugar. Okay. So is there a link to cancer? They've done some studies with pancreatic cancer, saying that it's associated with a higher risk, cardiovascular disease as well. But what they also say in these are two studies, that the higher sugar intake generally means that you have a more unhealthy lifestyle in general, and that you need to take that into account as well. So if we want to try and isolate the impact that sugar has on your health, you cannot isolate it cleanly. You have to look at the other factors as well. Your total calorie intake, your overall body weight, and your overall diet quality. And not just focus on, am I drinking too many sugary beverages, right? This is a meaty slide, and I put it in here just that you understand the nuances that exist when we look at sugar and cancer. So the mechanisms here. How does sugar actually influence cancer risk? And here are those three pillars again that I mentioned earlier: insulin resistance, inflammation, and metabolic effects. What am I really talking about? Okay, so insulin resistance here is one condition that can lead to an imbalance in the body. And I will explain, and when I go through the case study, I will explain this a little bit more in detail. The imbalance in the body, what does that create? Why is that a problem for our health? Why does that have a relationship to an increased cancer risk? Well, if we have too much insulin in the body from a too high sugar intake, it leads to elevated levels of insulin as a response to having blood glucose be high. That's just how the body works. Pancreas releases insulin when it is exposed to high levels of glucose from generally dietary intake, but also from stress that can increase glucose as well. And why is it a problem having too much insulin in the body? Well, cancer cells in general not all of them, but in general, it can be said that cancer cells have a higher number of insulin receptors on their cell membranes, meaning that if there is a chronic, meaning continuous exposure of higher levels of insulin that the body can't deal with, that can then become a risk factor for switching on certain growth patterns in cancer cells. All right. So these growth factors like insulin, they can promote cell proliferation and survival in some cancer cells. And it's broad enough that one can generalize that. There is another hormone, it's called insulin-like growth factor 1, that can also stimulate tumor growth. That can be measured in the blood if we have elevated levels of that, and that can also be caused through diet. We want to keep those levels in the normal range. We do not want to have those levels be elevated. And then, of course, glucose dysregulation generally. So if we are in a situation where we have chronic, again, chronic here meaning constant, regular, elevated levels of glucose, which we can fuel with through diet and beverage choices, but also through not managing stress very well. And I keep on saying that because I never want to just mention it, that people understand that there are other factors that can also lead to elevated glucose, not just food and diet. Because I deal with a lot of clients who actually eat pretty well, and yet we have some form of glucose dysregulation going on. So we always need to look at that, look at the whole person and what's going on in that person's life. So those factors that can lead to what is called insulin resistance, which is one step away from prediabetes and diabetes type 2, have been linked to a mechanism that can increase risk for cancers. Inflammation. So if we have chronically elevated glucose sugar in our system, that creates a low-grade inflammatory state because the body is not supposed to be exposed to that on a continuous basis. Chronic inflammation suppresses the immune system, suppresses immune surveillance, puts us at a higher risk for cancers and other chronic illnesses as well. These inflammatory cytokines, these are inflammatory markers, in particular ones, the tumor necrosis factor alpha and IL-6. Those can be identified again with lab work, with blood work. We don't want to have an excess or elevated levels of these inflammatory markers in our system. That is telling us something, that is an alarm state, that is a state that puts stress on the immune system. Oxidative stress comes from free radical damage to DNA in cells, and that can also be exacerbated by a heightened state of inflammation. We have this chronic inflammation going on in the body. And very often it's not this type of chronic inflammation that is visible. It is systemic. And by the time we notice it, we have had this going on for quite some time. It leads to immune dysfunction, impaired cancer surveillance mechanisms as well. So again, we want to keep an eye on what are we doing in our lives that could potentially contribute to some systemic or chronic inflammation, and we want to address that. Okay. And thirdly, metabolic effects here too. So if we have obviously a weight problem with excess adipose tissue, that can cause issues for us downline. One of the things is that it leads to elevated free and active estrogen. Okay, so we can have a hormonal impact and a hormonal soup going on in adipose tissue that leads to just normal metabolic regulation. You know, how do we break down excess hormones that we don't need? That can become dysregulated. So we have elevated levels of certain hormones, and again, once that is chronic, that could lead to elevated risk factors. That includes some cancers. Excess adipose tissue also in and of itself secretes inflammation proteins as well. And where this can also become an issue is in what it can end up in the liver. So-called fatty liver disease is a state of chronic inflammation of the liver. And we need the liver for the body's detoxification. So for those of us, first of all, going through extensive cancer treatments or ongoing cancer treatments as well, this becomes a very, very important topic, because we need to support the liver so that it can deal with that excess toxicity that we're creating through treatments. But even under normal circumstances, if we're not even undergoing any type of treatment for cancer, we need to understand that our liver needs to function top notch. Our own body's metabolism produces waste products. We need to take that into account. So, key takeaways, what do we really know as a summary of what I've just kind of focused on with the research part? So sugar is not a simple on and off cancer switch, all right? So we need to understand that higher sugar intake is related to metabolic imbalances, and that's what we need to focus on. And I will, moving on now. Not all sugar sources are equal, right? So it's the added sugars in particular through processed foods. We need to understand that some of the more healthy foods that also people stay away from when they hear sugar feeds cancer, they come with fiber and protective compounds, so we shouldn't stop eating those. Okay, we need to understand also how they get metabolized in our body. So weight, insulin, inflammation are central. We need to look at other things as well: physical activity, overall diet, smoking, alcohol, sleep. Those can affect people differently. So we need to get the bigger picture every single time for every individual person. It's different, everybody. And when it comes to this extreme restriction, there is just limited evidence at this point in time. And extreme restriction really is, I've stopped eating anything that is related to sugar, including healthy sugar options as well. That can become a problem. So these so-called experimental diets, as they are referred to, they, some of them are being studied. Yes, they aren't standard of care and they can carry risks. So for me, I also like to, like I say, I get the big picture. Okay, so when we are saying this is what we know from research, it takes a while for that research to get published and to become available and peer reviewed and for all to see. So in the meantime, you also, what other research is going on, what other trends are going on. So we can't ignore that. We can't ignore when there are certain dietary trends like low carbohydrate or ketogenic. Let's look into that. Let's try and understand, does that really also play a role here? Is that beneficial? And they can fall under the category of extreme restriction. But there's give or take here too. And that can be answered in a more personal frame as well. What is extreme? You probably will have that question as well, and we can come back to that too. So I think I've said enough about research, so let's actually go into the nitty-gritty. So I've created a case study here. I've called this person, she doesn't exist in real life, but she resembles a lot of clients that I deal with. I have not had a client with WM's type of diagnosis yet. But let's say Maya here. So she was recently diagnosed. She's asymptomatic at this point, and she's on a watch and wait approach by her oncologist, saying, let's just keep an eye on you. So that wasn't enough for Maya. So she's doing her own research, reading up, and she's read online that sugar feeds cancer, which you can find everywhere. And she's decided to cut out all sugar, and that includes fruits, grains, and most carbohydrates because they contain sugar. And this is something that it might sound simplistic as I presented here, but it actually is fairly common in clients that I meet. So what's the result? She's lost weight, and she's kind of happy about that. She said, I had a couple of pounds too much to lose, but she feels weak and tired. She is anxious about food and food choices, and she's obviously anxious about her future. And she also feels socially isolated around meals because, going out to eat with friends, being in a social environment, realizing I can't do this, I can't eat that, I can't drink this. And so you always kind of put yourself aside from everybody, and you're not part of the community anymore. So she's deeply unhappy. She feels that her dietary restrictions are fear-based, but she kind of cannot stop herself because being under a watch and wait scenario obviously is very fearful, and she feels that she's become depressed. How do we help her? When somebody presents like that to me, I like to take a step back and provide some overview to get the bigger picture. Okay, and in this instance, I want to focus on her having cut out almost all sugar, including those we find in carbohydrates. So let's understand why carbohydrates, besides proteins and fats, carbohydrates being one of the macronutrients, why carbohydrates are still important for us, always will remain important for us. Okay, so of those three macronutrients, proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, carbohydrates are the ones that actually provide energy, okay, to our cells. They regulate our blood glucose and insulin metabolism. There is that again, that blood sugar regulation. So again, in a simplistic form here, rising blood glucose, what does that do? It stimulates the pancreas to release the hormone insulin, which then signals the cells to absorb the glucose for energy or for storage, okay? For immediate energy, so you feel better, or for storage. Now, this excess glucose can be broken down in the liver to create fatty acids, triglycerides. I should be able to say that word, right? The triglycerides and cholesterol. So excess glucose, let's keep that in mind, excess glucose, okay? If the blood glucose level falls, pancreas releases the hormone glucagon, a different hormone now, and the adrenals, and they release cortisol, telling the liver to release the glucose. So there is this feedback loop that goes on without us thinking, that happens without anything, without us having to do anything. This happens as part of our body's metabolism. Okay, so carbohydrates play a role in this regulation. Now, the type of carbohydrates that are important. So the simple refined carbohydrates, those from white flour products, okay, white pasta, white bread, where the fiber is missing, they lead to very rapid digestion in our system and a quick increase in blood glucose and insulin, okay? Now, the complex carbohydrates, they contain fiber, they slow the digestion down and cause a very gradual increase in both glucose and insulin. That's kind of what we want. That's the goal. So that's why it's very important to understand what types of carbohydrates we should really stay away from or really limit very much so, and which carbohydrates are actually okay to consume if we consume them with proteins and fat. Okay. So why is insulin a problem? Okay, so the insulin, as I mentioned, it's a hormone secreted by the pancreas. Now it influences hormonal and cell signaling in cells, and that includes in tumor cells. All right, so it is a signal that cancer cells can use. And cancer cells, I've mentioned it before, they can have an overexpression of these insulin receptors. In other words, they can have more on their cell surface. This can promote cancer cell growth. Do we know if a particular cancer cell in the particular diagnosis that we have has a higher amount of insulin receptors? Unfortunately, there aren't really tests out there right now to kind of figure that out. So the answer is we are making that assumption because the studies that exist, what we know, have shown them to have an overexpression of these receptors in many cancer cell types. Okay. Unfortunately, I didn't find anything in your research that specifies, the type of cancer that we hear that this group is afflicted by. But again, let's get the bigger picture here. Okay. So chronic elevated glucose, insulin, and these inflammatory cytokines, these inflammation markers, they can hyperactivate these insulin receptors, and that can contribute to tumor growth. And then we have these tumor suppressor genes. They can have mutations. That's where it gets complicated, right? So our cancer cells can have very specific characteristics, a very specific personality with its own mutations, which can then favor insulin signaling as well. So it's not standard of care yet to offer this type of testing to find this out, but there are some more specialized testing, genetic testing, mutation testing for cancer cells that can give us that type of information, but they're all out of pocket and they're pretty pricey at this point. So we do not want to have chronic elevated glucose and insulin in our environment in general, okay, because that could potentially favor cell survival in cells that have damaged DNA. So let's just not even go there, okay? Fiber, also part of carbohydrates. This is our friend, our biggest friend. These are the non-digestible plant materials that pass through the GI tract, that clean it out as well. And they play another very, very big role that is really, really important for our inner environment. They support the growth of healthy bacteria in our microbiome. Our microbiome are all the healthy bacteria that we have that we need, okay, that create, that stimulate healthy immune responses. And that can also reduce any inflammation we have or suppress the growth of any pathogenic strains. All right. So healthy bacteria are a good thing to have, and we need to work hard to maintain that balance. Okay. That's something we can do. We also want to make sure that we are able to have a bowel movement at least once a day. Okay. If not twice a day. So this fecal transit time can be reduced and can be sped up if we eat a diet that is rich in fiber, which are these more complex carbohydrates, the pictures that you see up there as well. Because we store waste products in our stool, and that can be waste products from our own body's metabolism, but also from treatment-related breakdown metabolites, right? So we want them to be able to be flushed out of the system as soon as possible and not sit there and be reabsorbed into the bloodstream. So that is a very, very important I don't want to call it simple, it's not simple, but a daily activity that we really, really want to have regulated is just regular bowel movements. And then also in the colon, we have certain fatty acids, short-chain fatty acids, that if we have normal levels of them, they can help suppress free radical damage and inflammation, again, supporting the immune system. So when we do comprehensive stool tests, which we sometimes do, we get that feedback. What is your short-chain fatty acid status like in your poop, in your bowels? And if that is low, there's something in dietary we can do to raise those levels. It's very important to keep that at a normal level. So that too, in this microenvironment, is very, very important to understand. And we can achieve that by eating healthy carbohydrates, the complex carbohydrates that have a lot of fiber in them. So leading back to just the sugars, right? Narrowing it down to the sugar topic. Which sugars do I ditch? All right, so we have a certain high priority to reduce and we have a lower priority. And that's how I'd like to explain it to Maya as well. So the higher priority, we look at the sugary drinks, sodas, sports drinks, and even some of the energy drinks that contain glucose. We need to be careful there. So sometimes people are also telling us, energy drinks contain electrolytes, go drink them. We have to look at the labels, and I'll teach you further down in the presentation how to label read as well. We need to understand which of these drinks are actually potentially contributing to an imbalance if we consume them on a regular basis. I had a client, and her, through lab work, her glucose levels just weren't regulating, and we were racking our brains because she was being really, really proactive in all her choices. And it turned out she was drinking a particular energy drink that contained high levels of glucose. And we finally nailed it and understood that was still causing such a disturbance for her glucose levels. White flour foods, mentioned them before, the cookies, the candies, pastries, cupcakes, breads, bagels, donuts, anything made with white flour will not cause to a slow, gradual release of glucose. It will spike your blood sugar levels once you eat them within half an hour. We want to avoid those spikes. Not good for us, not good for the general metabolism, causing inflammation, etc. We just want to stay away from that, okay? Flavored yogurts, really be careful, even the organic ones. Flavored meaning those that all have the fruit flavors, they can be very high in added sugars, okay? So rather go for the plain and sweeten it with your own fruit. Some of the granola bars, they could be candy in disguise. So again, here too, let's be very, very mindful of the labels, and I'll give you an example as well. What to look out for, that we don't think we're doing a good thing, but actually contributing to blood glucose imbalances regularly. And then also our condiments and sauces in everything. Here in the United States, ketchup, barbecue sauce, salad dressings, sugar, 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 sugar. When we moved to the United States 25 years ago, this year, it's actually coming up in 2 weeks. We will be here 25 years. We came from South Africa. And the first thing I noticed when I went to the grocery store here is I smelled sugar, especially walking down the bread aisles. It had this sweet smell to it. And then just starting to eat normal food and realizing how sweet everything is. So we've gotten used to a high level of sweet. What was really disturbing was we were exposing ourselves to just normal foods, and just a few weeks, we didn't notice that sweet anymore. It didn't taste sweet anymore. It tasted normal. And that's a very important point that we need to realize is our taste buds can adjust, and we can retrain our taste buds as well. Once we become more aware of where is sugar hidden, how can we avoid it, and how do we expose ourselves to less sugar with time, you will get quite naturally to a point where you will suddenly notice how sweet something tastes. And that will become your own personal block to further consume that. It's actually a really fun system if you allow your taste buds this time to adjust. The lower priority foods are whole fruits. Yes, they contain sugars, but they come with fiber, they come with nutrients. We don't want to avoid them. There's a way in which we eat them, all right, which I'm going to list later on as well. But just right now, the concept is I don't want you to stop eating fruit just because it contains sugar, okay? We are missing out on a lot if we do. Plain dairy. Dairy is one of those topics, if we are not sensitive to dairy, there shouldn't be any problem with consuming dairy. Here too, I've had clients say to me, but it has milk sugar in it. I'm avoiding that too. It's natural. Lactose is natural. So that is not something that spikes your blood sugar levels. Plain dairy, right? Vegetables, like I said, even the sweeter ones like carrots and beets and so on, just think of the vibrant colors that they offer you. We don't want to miss out on all those phytonutrients and antioxidants by avoiding those vegetables. Whole grains, whole meaning fibers. The whole grains meaning the fiber hasn't been stripped away. So they very often really are a great addition to our diet. We just need to look at portion sizes, right? We don't want to have a huge portion of whole grains and a little portion of protein, for example. We want that to be a little bit more balanced. But I don't, again, agree with cutting out whole grains just because they are carbohydrates that turn to sugar. They provide us with a lot of the B vitamins, the whole grains, and of course the fiber in and of itself speaks for the fact that the glucose will be released more slowly. So yes, get used to eating whole grains, not refined grains. Okay. And then there are certain unsweetened items like plain oatmeal, packets, and we cannot avoid processed foods, but we need to be a bit more mindful in how we select them. Granola mixes, nut and seed butters, drinks. Let's become label readers. And one little tip here, on nutrition labels, we look for the added sugars, and if the first 3 ingredients that we see are sugars, we don't take that product. Under the ingredients, at least here in the United States, I have to add, those ingredients that have the highest amount in that particular product will be listed first. So if the first three ingredients are sugar, the first three ingredients are sugar. And that says something about that particular product. So let's look at a label. Now, these are, for those that are based in the US, these are US nutrition facts labels that are pretty uniform looking. I know they can look a little bit differently in other countries. What I like about the US nutrition facts label is that it has all these, it's very clear. So when you're looking for example, total carbohydrates, you're looking at the sugars, you can clearly find it. It's bold, it's highlighted, and so on. So let's do two things here. We're looking at the nutrition facts label per se, and we're looking at the ingredients. Those are two separate parts on a product. So I've got one here for yogurt, and I've got one here for a granola bar. So we look under total carbohydrates, okay, but we don't start there. We look at the serving size, first of all. What are they basing this information on? So the serving size is important. So if you look at this yogurt one, it says about 3/4 of a cup, and then you need to ask yourself, is that one serving for me, or would I eat 2 or 3 in one go? Okay, so that's number one, is how much am I actually going to eat of this? So is this information that I'm reading here, which says total carbohydrates gives me 18 grams, is that what I'm consuming now, or do I need to double that? Okay, so here, for example, we see very little dietary fiber, and we see total sugars, including added sugars, are 11 grams. So that's high. Okay, we look at the ingredients list, and where does the sugar come from? They've added cane sugar, they've added some fruit pectin, natural flavors, which you never quite know what does that mean. Okay, that could contain sugar, and fruit and vegetable juice concentrate. All of those could include sugar, could be part of the added sugars. Okay. With the granola bar, similarly, we look at what's the serving size. Oh, so these are 6 in the container. Serving size is a 2-bar pouch. Okay. Total carbs, 25 grams. Dietary fibers, only 2 grams. So that leaves me with 23 grams of net carbohydrates. That's still pretty high. Okay, so the fiber content here is pretty low. And again, 11 grams added sugars coming from cane sugar, dextrose, syrups, a couple. They're not quite listed at the top, but they're still there. So something like this, if you see a product that has 10 grams or more of added sugars, I consider that pretty high, and especially if you eat this on a regular basis. If this is something that you grab every day, a granola bar, because you're running around and you want to, this is high. This is high exposure to added sugars. We have orange juice here as another example, and chocolate chip cookie. So the orange juice, look at how many sugars they are. Okay, so rather eat the whole orange with everything, with the pulp and with the white stuff. Don't cut that white stuff away. That actually has lots of phytonutrients in it. Rather than drinking orange juice, that is not a healthy drink. It spikes your blood sugar levels. Okay. A chocolate chip cookie here, again, various parts of where you see how sugar was added. Total sugars are 18 grams. That's high. This is a sugar bomb, this chocolate chip cookie. Okay. So how do we go about consuming less sugar? Okay, so here's some practical strategies for doing that. So start with some daily rituals. What are you doing every single day that you could change? Let's just start there, because that's what will have the most impact. Things that you do on a very regular basis, on a consistent basis, on a chronic basis, right? So, for example, maybe that is swapping out a sugary drink for something that is naturally flavored, water or herbal tea. Something that you do every single day. That's where you start. Okay. Reducing the refined carbohydrates. Nothing made with white flour that has no fiber. That's also one way to start. That will cut out a lot of foods you may be consuming that raise your blood sugar levels too fast, right? Without controlling it, without regulating your glucose insulin metabolism. So focus on the complex carbohydrates, those that have fiber, the nuts and seeds and whole fruits and vegetables, whole grains, okay? And when you need to snack, if you need to snack, you want to snack on real food, okay? That can be nuts or pumpkin or sunflower seeds because they're a bit bigger. Olives are fantastic to snack on. We get meat sticks here, naturally made meat sticks or jerky as a form of a dried meat here. Fruit, eat real fruit with plain yogurt that is unsweetened, okay? Carrot sticks and guacamole made with avocados, for example, all right? So there are options here on snacking, but the concept here is snack on real foods. For us ladies, if we get hot flashes, I don't know, where we are in our postmenopausal stages, but they increase with rising blood sugar levels as well. So for those of us where our blood sugar metabolism isn't managed very well, we can get more hot flashes. Okay, so that's something that is something also to look out for that you may not be aware of. Talked about check the nutrition facts labels, become label readers. Okay, look for the high fiber amount under total carbohydrates. Is there enough fiber in this product to warrant me taking it? And the ingredients lists, same thing. And then the electrolyte drinks, some are high in sugars. Let's watch for them as well. And of course, the taste buds, right? So it really takes between 6 and 12 weeks for taste buds to adapt if you expose to them daily. So if you're trying to wean yourself off a certain level of sweet, you have to expose yourself daily to that. One other thing, if I know that sometimes people really, really struggle to make certain changes, and I'm one for let's find what you can really do so that it becomes doable and sustainable. And if eating no pasta is a real deal killer for you, cooking it al dente already ensures that less available carbohydrates are available. And then, of course, just eat a small side portion and eat it for lunch when you're going to be moving afterwards. That's another important thing to realize. So I know we've got quick Q&A coming up soon, so I'll be brief. Eat fruit as a dessert after your meal with protein and fat. Don't eat fruit as a meal. Okay, that also leads to better blood sugar balancing. Reduce your carbohydrate portion size. Make it a side portion. Chew your food. Eat slowly. Don't wolf down your food because it actually shuts off your body's signaling to tell you I'm full. So we could also overeat then. All right. Move. Give that blood sugar a place to go. Okay. So when ideally in many European countries, the bigger meal is eaten midday. It's actually a pretty good thing to do. Okay. Doesn't work so well in my household here, but move, get some exercise. Then the muscle mass. So this is something that I would pick up with Maya as well, seeing that she's lost weight, our case study. So we don't want to lose weight because that means we can also lose muscle mass. We can become weaker and we can start having balance issues, fall more, etc. So we want to try and avoid that. So how do we focus on that? If we are trying to lose weight and we don't want to lose muscle weight, a body composition scale, and there's a picture of one that you can buy online, costs about $130. There are different types out there now. It's become really, really common. That measures not just your weight, but it looks at the weight. What is that broken down to? How much is water weight? How much is muscle mass? And that can guide you a lot better than if you're just looking at what the scale says in terms of your total weight. It's a really great strategy to make sure that you understand, where do you store fat as well? Is it visceral fat around your organs, which is the dangerous kind, or is it subcutaneous fat, the pinchable kind? So it's a great educational tool. Focus on the whole pattern, right? So reducing the added sugar is one lever among several for cancer prevention. We really also have to look at overall physical activity, overall diet quality, Stop smoking if you are. Getting adequate sleep, so important for the body's ability to rejuvenate. Stress management techniques. Stress can raise glucose levels, okay, by quite a substantial amount. So that in itself is a whole topic all on its own. Mindfulness practices and a faith or spirituality based practice, all of those play a role in reducing cancer risk and prevention. Finally, there are certain inner terrain assessment, blood monitoring, sugar monitoring tools we can do. So we can track our macronutrient intake with various apps that can tell us, how are we doing in terms of our carbohydrate intake. There are certain lab markers that we can do regularly. It's called the diabetic panel. That gives us information on how well our body actually regulates the blood sugar metabolism. We can wear a continuous glucose monitor for just 2 or 3 weeks to see what actually triggers my glucose. If we think we are eating right and we're finding lab markers show the glucose, fasting glucose still to be high, for example, we can find out. We can play a little bit of detective and see what else triggers my glucose. Is it that conversation that I have to have with my very old mother once a day, etc., etc. Okay, so what is the one belief about sugar and cancer that has changed for you today? Is really the question I want to leave you with as you walk away and ponder about this presentation. And let me stop my share and get back to you for questions, Q&A. And like I said, I will answer if your question is related to sugar and cancer, so I will refine that. I will be very happy to answer it if we don't get the time to do it now.
Thank you so much, Kirstin. I've been collecting the questions. So just a reminder for those who are still here and might have questions, we are still recording. If you're not cool with having your image in the YouTube video that will be put on our website, don't come off mute and share your camera. This is going to help our editor, Rick, tremendously. So Kirstin, that was such a beautiful presentation, packed with so much incredibly useful information. I, was also watching for the questions as we went through, and I've kind of condensed them. I do, right out of the gate, we are dealing with a very rare bunch of folks here, rare cancer. So I doubt that you know the answer to this, but maybe this is something you could kind of circle back to at some point. So we had a question from Betty Ann. She asked, do WM cells, i.e. our monoclonal IgM, have increased insulin receptors? When you were talking about the
Yes.
relationship between, the cancer growth, could you gauge that at any time? Or
with preparing for this, with what I was able to look at, I didn't find anything, any research that pointed me in that direction, that said anything about that. I just don't think it has been studied yet. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to continue looking, because I'm just curious, because this is to me, it's a very basic, straightforward question. Do my cancer cells, or the type of cancer that I have, is that really affected by this generalized statement? So I totally understand where that question is coming from. But up to now, I have not found anything that gives me any information on it.
Yeah, thank you for doing a little bit of digging before this presentation. We have a lot of questions coming in about those sugar substitutes. Can you address, which ones are the best? Monk fruit. We had people talking about stevia. So curious how you address that question.
I was hoping you'd ask that because it's important to know. So there are some artificial sweeteners that are better for you because they don't cause inflammation and they don't cause your hormones to be disrupted. Why are they better for you? Is they do not affect a rise in glucose, your insulin glucose metabolism. So they are, the other term for that is low glycemic, okay, meaning it doesn't raise your blood sugar levels. Like the sugar alcohols. Erythritol is one of them. Many of these sugars are made with that. Monk fruit as well. Syrups are there. The stevia. Yes, they don't influence your glucose metabolism. Are they processed foods? Yes, they are processed foods as well. And generally, we need to understand the impact that processed foods have on us. But if we are trying to still include some form of treat, so do some form of baking with these types of sugar substitutes, that is definitely an option. If we look at it from a point of view, I can make myself a muffin or a cupcake or a cookie with these sugar substitutes, right? I can get used to how they taste like, because they will taste differently. Some of them leave a bit of a almost like a cold sensation in your mouth. But it allows me to have access to a treat every now and then. Okay. So by all means, it's about, how do I cope long term? How do I live long term? I'm not on a diet, on a short term diet. I'm needing to eat like this for a long period of time. So often I say, as a transition period, if you're used to eating a lot of baked goods and so on, and you want to move away from it, that is a good initial stepping stone. The ideal path is that you eat less and less of those, okay, over time, and your need for using that as a treat becomes less. I'm not saying totally eradicate it. I'm just saying less. That's kind of the goal. So in other words, if we are eating, I don't know, if we are having something that we now use refined sugar with every single day, we do not want to replace that with a sugar substitute and continue eating at the same pace. We kind of want to reduce that a little bit and focus more on whole foods. Whole foods. Also, that's my reference on the whole food snacks as well. Okay, so just that we move away a little bit from this type of sugary treat. But those are good substitutes to use in the interim. Yes.
And so whole foods would include things like honey and maple syrup.
Correct. So that's part of that. And naturally, you will use less of those because they're not as sweet. And that's kind of where it's ideally to get to, is that the tongue becomes used to less sweet, because those artificial uh, sugar sweeteners, right? The substitutes, sorry, the sugar substitutes, they can be very sweet. So we keep that sugar threshold the same. And I'm saying we should work on that sugar threshold and lower it, that we need less sweet. That will allow us to then embrace the more whole foods options, and we are satisfied with that.
And so combining, if you're making something with a maple syrup or a honey, and yes, you're trying to reduce your sort of need for that sweet taste, but adding, making sure that whatever you're eating that has that maple syrup or honey or a natural whole food thing that is sweet, you're trying to give yourself that taste, making sure that it has fiber and protein and a healthy fat will help with the glucose spike.
Yes, yes, yes,
Okay,
for
so
sure. And
that's
again, things are relative here too. So let's say you've got this wonderful recipe where you're making cupcakes that has a bit of honey in it, and it has maybe some more fiber containing flour, like almond flour in it, and so on, coconut meal, and so on, some chopped up nuts. Don't have it every day. We don't need something like that every day. We can have that as a make it a weekend treat, or make it once in the middle of the week, I'll have a sweet treat, and then on the weekend, I might have something. So in other words, reduce the need for that and find other ways to serve that need, because that's an emotional need. If we want to treat ourselves every night when we're sitting and maybe watching Netflix or whatever habit we have, and we've grown accustomed to treating ourselves, we need to start analyzing what we're doing here and why we need that. So it's a little bit more than changing our taste buds too. It's also a little bit about finding different habits and it's more of an emotional aspect here that we have as well.
I totally get that. And my sort of habit is dark chocolate. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. And
Yeah.
then also we had a couple questions about the types of flours,
Mhm.
which is better. There's somebody from Finland here. They eat a lot of rye bread, and then,
Mm,
whole wheat versus
yeah,
white. I think we kind of know the answer to that. But so
yeah.
dark chocolate and different types of flour, if you could address that.
Um, so dark chocolate, yes. I mean, if the cacao content is 70% or higher, that's considered dark. And that's actually a great option. Again, you will need to get your taste buds used to dark chocolate versus milk chocolate, because milk chocolate is a lot sweeter. But by moving in that direction, you will only need one or two pieces of dark chocolate a night. Okay, really, to satisfy that need. You won't need more, because you are reducing the need for sweet, and you're introducing, oh, I actually kind of like bitter. That takes a while to get there. So dark chocolate is a great way. Um, of having a little treat and getting yourself over that hump of, I need to treat myself every night. Um, the different types of flours, really good question, because I love European bread, just in general. The way, I mean, I've grown up German and so on. I'm German, Swiss, Austrian, and the way that some of their bread is, it's so healthful. It's just the way that the bread is made. Okay, and rye bread, yes. I mean, those are more what I consider whole foods types of breads. Where no sugar is being added again. It's just actually it's a very often with fermented dough and so on and so forth. So those are healthier choices. Yes.
Wonderful. Yes, it seems like we have a lot of bakers and a lot of people who make their own foods in this
Yes.
audience, wanting to know about substitutes. Like, we have to have our pasta. How are we going to have our pasta? Could we have pasta that's made with lentils or brown rice or chickpeas? Would that be a positive addition?
Mhm. So here to have a look at the nutrition facts label. You want to look at the serving size, and then you look at the line, the total carbohydrates, and then you look at how much fiber there is. Because you might be surprised to find that some of those more they sold as gluten-free options, right, are actually higher in the net carbohydrates than whole wheat or normal wheat pastas are. Okay. So when I say net carbohydrates, it means you look at the total carbohydrates and you subtract the fiber amount. What's left gives you the net carbohydrates. So when you do that with the gluten-free pastas, have a look and see. Okay, understand how many um, carbohydrates you're getting here. Now, the whole wheat pastas have more fiber. They probably will be higher, or rather lower in the net carbohydrates than something made with rice flour. So have a look and see, and start educating yourself in your exposure to carbohydrates. Okay, because I don't know how you eat in overall. So how many carbohydrates do you consume in total? Okay, and where does that pasta fit in? So you try and get the bigger picture here too. And are you also eating a lot of whole foods carbohydrates? Okay, also a lot of vegetables, different plant-based carbohydrates. Very important to increase that. And then when you have your pasta meal, make sure that the actual pasta portion isn't your main dish. That is actually a more of a side portion, and that the protein that you make with it, because you want to have protein with every meal, that regulates your blood sugar levels as well, protein with every meal. So the protein portion needs to be a sizable portion, and then you want to have vegetables. You want to have colorful array of different vegetables throughout the week. So that's important too. If you're looking at how do I manage the pasta thing.
Thank you. And I am really getting hungry to hearing about all these different foods. Um, I was really interested in hearing more about getting the toxins out of the body, having regular movements. And we had some questions coming in about constipation and how you might address that through diet or supplement. I don't know if you have any recommendations on that.
So constipation can be one of those things that can either be pretty easy to address, or are a little bit more complex. So it really depends on the person. It depends what influences that, influences the transit time. Are you taking certain medications that have an influence on that? How much fiber are you consuming in your diet? How hydrated are you? So, you could be dehydrated. So those factors play into that as well. Generally, baseline is magnesium as a supplement, right? Magnesium as a mineral is a calming mineral, and when we take that at night, um, it's supposed to almost, it can become a laxative if we take too much of it. It just calms the muscles down to such a degree that you couldn't keep it in anymore, kind of a thing. So very often we are deficient in magnesium. And the way you best test that too is you test the magnesium in red blood cells, not in serum, not in your blood serum. That it needs to be magnesium in red blood cells. That's how you order it from one of our standard labs. To understand if you're really deficient. If we are on certain cancer treatments, certain long-term chemotherapies, they will deprive you of magnesium as well. So you can start by supplementing with magnesium at night, and you cannot overdose on magnesium. You would get diarrhea. Okay, that's basically it. So sometimes you have to start with one capsule, then with 2 or 3, depending on what you want to do. You want to get a normal, a passable bowel movement. Okay, and very often that does the trick. Massaging your lower abdomen, sitting in an Epsom salt bath, which is magnesium, also is helpful. But basically, are you taking medication that's causing constipation? Are you hydrated enough? Are you eating enough fiber? Look at those factors as well.
Thank you so much. I want to be mindful of your time, so I'm going to wrap up our questions for now, and give you all the option to, if you really
Yeah.
had a burning question, to email me or to email Kirstin, with that. Well, I'll say email me and then I'll gather them because this is what happened with our supplements webinar that we had a while back. Everybody had a million questions and I was able to follow up with another. But for now, I will just say thank you so much, Kirstin. This is just it feels like the tip of the iceberg. And I hope that we get to work together with you and, get to the macronutrients. We had questions about how much protein is the right amount of protein, things about intermittent fasting. And I think that should be maybe the next webinar that we cover with you. We
Yeah.
can talk about some of the other pieces of the equation.
Yes, there are so many more parts of the nutrition equation, as you say, and yeah, just take a deep breath, everyone. Take a deep breath. I think you're doing a wonderful job at just being so proactive. By just coming here, just attending here, means you are a very proactive person. And keep the perspective. Keep the perspective. Don't get drawn in by sensationalist language. Keep the perspective.